Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. We're back again with more Elex 2, and this time I wanted to go through the attributes and abilities that are available in the game. Elex 2 can be extremely difficult, especially in those first 10 hours when you're not really doing all that much combat and you feel weak and you're trying to build your character up to somebody who can go out into the world by himself. Hopefully, I can provide some information in this video that'll help break down these systems and assist you in making the best character you possibly can. If you enjoy this content and enjoy content about role-playing games in general, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and leave me a like down below. Really helps out the content and helps me get it to more people. And with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. So I want to start on the attribute screen because I feel like a lot of what we talk about here is going to inform what we talk about in the ability section. First thing to understand about attributes is you don't increase attributes because of what they directly give you. So if we look at strength and go all the way to the right, you'll see it gives you a +1 on melee damage, which probably gives you the impression that if you pump up strength to crazy high levels, it's going to all of a sudden allow you to do a crazy amount of melee damage while you're out in the world. That's not really true. What increases your proficiency in combat are your abilities and the gear that you get access to throughout the game. And both of these will have ability or attribute point requirements in order for you to get them. So you're increasing your attributes to unlock your ability to use other things. It's not about what it directly gives you. Also recognize that as your attribute score increases, it's going to be more difficult for you to raise that score. So right now at the beginning of this game, you've got a 1-to-1 ratio. For every attribute point you receive, you'll be able to increase your attributes by 1. It increases to requiring 2 attribute points, I think maybe around level 40 or 50. And then by the time you reach level 60, it's actually going to require you to use 5 attribute points in order to increase your attribute by 1. So you need to be very, very strategic as far as how you're using these attribute points and kind of try to plan out what kind of character you want to create so you know which attributes you want to focus on. Now, going over them real quickly, again, strength is going to increase melee damage. There's no weight system in Elex 2, so you don't have to worry about strength to be able to carry items. Also, there's no differentiation in armor, so it doesn't have light, medium, and heavy armor. So you also do not need strength for that either. It's strictly about melee damage and the things that it'll unlock from you from a gear and ability standpoint. Constitution, like most games, is going to increase your max HP. Dexterity is going to increase your range damage. Intelligence is going to increase your magic damage. So depending upon what faction you join, you could get magic powers that will do offensive damage, and it will benefit to a small degree from you increasing intelligence. And then finally, cunning allows you to increase the critical damage that you can do throughout the game. So now that we've finished that discussion, let's go ahead and move into abilities. So if we look at this ability screen, there's going to be several different sections we'll go through, and there will be chapters down below referencing each section in case you want to skip around or there are some things you know you don't care about. So starting with combat, you have melee weapons, which is going to be your main way, besides gear, of increasing the melee damage that you do. So obviously, if melee weapons is what you plan to use, this is definitely something that you want. Then melee weapon specialist is going to lower the requirements for you to use certain melee weapons. So like I said before, you'll get gear that will say you need a specific strength score, or maybe even a specific constitution score or dexterity score in order for you to be able to use it. By taking this skill, you'll be able to lower those requirements, allowing you to use higher tier gear, even if you have mid-tier stats. And then down below, we have backstab, which allows you to do more damage to opponents when you attack them from behind. If you're attacking in melee, this is an absolute must. If you're traveling around with a companion, which I absolutely recommend that you should be doing, you're going to get a lot of opportunities to roll behind enemies and then start attacking them there. Companions do a great job of drawing a lot of the heat from enemies away from you onto them. And then next up, we basically have the heavy weapons version of the same tier of abilities. So you have grenades, it's going to increase your grenade damage. Heavy weapon damage can be increased. Grenades are considered to be a heavy weapon, and you can be a heavy weapon specialist, which is again going to lower the requirements for you to use certain weapons. And the same with range weapons, even though it has the symbol for a bow, energy weapons do benefit from this particular ability. You can get energy master, which is going to increase the damage you do with energy weapons. And then they have corresponding abilities if you're using projectile based weapons like bows and crossbows, or powder master for those of you who prefer to use shotguns. And then again, they have an ability for lowering the requirements for you to use a specific weapon. I highly recommend that you choose one of these types of ways of entering combat and then specialize in that area. You do get a lot of abilities, you do get a lot of attribute points, but I would say you really don't get enough to excel at all of these while at the same time creating a well-rounded character. So I would recommend figure out which one you like and then stick to that. Scrolling down to survival, first up you have armor, which is going to increase the amount of protection points that you have. If you're playing as a melee character, I think this is a no-brainer. You're probably going to get hit more, and you're probably going to be increasing your strength and constitution anyway. So it's going to be natural for you to have access to this. From a ranged character perspective, which is what I played as when I did my full run through of Elex 2, I did not start putting points into this until the last couple of hours of the game. And so I would definitely say if you're focusing on range, it's not a requirement. However, I will say that I felt like a glass cannon for most of the game. So if you find that that irritates you and your health goes down too easily, maybe you're not doing a good job of avoiding damage and you want that additional protection, I definitely wouldn't be against going ahead and taking this. Next up is resist all, which is going to increase your resistance. You have enemies that will do poison damage, reality damage, fire damage, things of that nature, and this will help you resist them more. I did not get any points into this whatsoever for my entire run through. It's possible if you're playing in melee, again, you're going to be getting hit more. This might be worth it, but I would definitely put natural protection over and above this because there are plenty of enemies that will do tremendous damage to you, but it doesn't have a specific type that you can resist. Sixth Sense allows you to display enemies on your radar. I definitely would not pick this up. You can use your eyes and see clearly when enemies are coming up. If you run into an enemy that is too hard for you to fight, it's actually very easy for you to run away from fights. So I just don't see it as a big deal not being able to see your enemies on your radar. Don't need this at all. Stronger potions will allow your potions to be 25% more effective. Potions are the best way to heal yourself in the middle of a fight. I would highly recommend that you take this regardless of whether or not you plan to create your own potions. There are a ton of potions that you can loot in the area, and there are a lot of potions that you can buy as well. So regardless of whether or not you plan to play around in alchemy, I think this is well worth taking. Good Eater is going to allow your food to be 50% more effective. So food is another way for you to gain health. However, it allows you to gain health significantly slower than potions does. I personally don't believe that this is worth it because at least in my playthrough, the main way I use food is to heal myself after a battle has finished so that I'm not using up my potions all the time. But if you've already finished the battle, then you really don't care about it taking a little bit longer for you to heal all the way back up. Especially since usually at the end of a fight, you have to go around and loot all the bodies and loot the general area. So once I finish the fight, I just pop enough food where I know when it finishes healing, I'm going to be fully healed up. And then I'm doing all of my looting while the food is doing its work. So to me, this is not really something that I would take. But if for whatever reason you're determined to use food as the way that you heal during a fight, it could potentially be useful to you. But I would say, honestly, after taking both of these, potions is just pretty obviously the way that you want to heal in the middle of a fight, and therefore this isn't worth it. Extra hit points is obviously going to give you extra hit points while you're running around. This could be a little bit worth it again, especially being ranged and feeling like a glass cannon. Having a little bit more padding on your health bar is nothing to feel bad about, and it's relatively inexpensive for you to be able to get. It's just Constitution, and you might want to increase Constitution anyway. Health regeneration. I personally would say this is not worth it. The health regeneration, it's the only way it's worth it is if for whatever reason you're tired of having to make your own food and you just want, after a battle finishes, for your health to just increase on its own and you don't have to even think about it. But even if you get to level 3 of this skill, your health is not going to regenerate fast enough where you can depend upon it in combat. Where if you're halfway down and you're in the middle of a fight, you can say, hey, I don't need to pop a potion because I'm just going to regenerate the health that I need. It's not that powerful. And so I would say more than likely, this really isn't worth it. Lone Wolf is going to allow your stats to be increased significantly when you are traveling without companions. I personally don't recommend traveling without companions, especially the first time you play through this game. But if for whatever reason, maybe you're on your second playthrough, or maybe you're just not interested in any of the companions, obviously this is going to be well worth you taking. Stamina is going to permanently increase your stamina. Stamina is very, very important if you're fighting in melee. So if you're doing that, I would highly recommend it. If you're playing as a ranged character, it means significantly less. There's nothing in combat you have to do that requires stamina. You are going to use stamina while you're running around in the world. But if you've seen my tips video, you already know that I strongly recommend you prioritize upgrading the jump jet. And once you have that, even midway upgraded, you're probably going to be doing a lot more flying than you are running. And so it's still questionable as a ranged character if you need to upgrade this at all. But as a melee character, undoubtedly, this is well worth it. And then you have stamina regeneration, same deal as a ranged character. I don't feel like this makes sense. But as a melee character, absolutely. Being able to do whatever you can to keep more stamina is really, really going to help you in a fight. Next section is crafting. So it starts off with lockpicking. There are a ton of things in the game that require lockpicking in order for you to be able to access it. The flip side of that, I hate the lockpicking minigame. This is personal, but I think the game does a very poor job of explaining what in the heezy is going on in that mini game. A lot of times I'm just sliding the lockpick back and forth, waiting for it to just magically open. And so consequently, I never increased this and I never regretted it. There's a ton of gear to loot and things for you to be able to sell. So you're not really, really going to miss it. But if the lockpicking mini game does not bother you, again, there's a ton of things for you to be able to use it on, and you're probably going to get a lot more money and maybe even some unique items out of being able to unlock those chests. So if you can tolerate it, it's not a bad move at all. And then, of course, getting locksmith and only needing one lockpick could definitely be beneficial to you if you plan to unlock everything you could potentially come across. For me, I'm breaking lockpicks left and right, even on some of the easier level locks. So this is well worth the investment. Pickpocket allows you to be able to pickpocket other people. I never used it once and never ran into a situation. I take that back. I ran into one situation in my entire 45-hour experience with the game where I wished I had pickpocket. But that's it. And even in that situation, I probably would have needed to have it at level 3 in order to make use of it. So I would say this is not something you need to worry about at all. Down here, you have chemistry. Chemistry is really, really nice. There are some great potions in the game that will allow you to increase your attributes, will give you ability points that you can use here, and just flat out give you experience. So it's definitely nice having chemistry, but I would say chemistry is more of a late game pickup. Like even when I had it, I wasn't constantly just making potions because you can pick up and buy so many potions anyway. So it was more like late game when I was trying to get those really, really high level abilities and needed a boost for my attributes. Then I started really, really looking at what potions might be able to help me. Also, to create the really nice potions, you kind of have to farm the harder enemies a little bit. Like they have specific ingredients that you can't just pick up anywhere. And so again, it's nice to have, but it's not something that I would say is one of the real necessary abilities for you to get. Hacking is awesome. The mini game is significantly less painful than lockpicking. There are a ton of safes throughout the world for you to be able to hack. I got 2 points into this and definitely did not regret it. I highly recommend it. Mining allows you to get more ore yield when you mine. So you'll come across these different rock surfaces that will allow you to use a jackhammer and then get specific ores from it. I never picked this up. You get a ton of different ores automatically just going around in the game. And there are a lot of different ores that you can buy. This to me is not necessary at all. Build weapons allows you to combine weapons of the same type to build higher damage versions of that same weapon. The damage increase that you get is significant. So it's well worth taking if you are focusing on melee. If you are focusing on range, the problem here is that it has a strength requirement in order for you to be able to pick it up. And to get that third level, if I remember correctly, the strength requirement is astronomical, like 75 strength, if I remember correctly, which is a lot to ask for in a build that does not need strength for combat. And from my experience using energy weapons, I needed the last level of build weapons to be able to make weapons that were actually going to be useful for me. So if you are playing as melee, again, I think it's an absolutely fantastic option. You're already going to be building up strength. This is going to make your melee weapons do significantly more damage. But from a ranged character, at least doing energy weapons, I don't think it's a big deal. If you're focusing on heavy weapons, I think you might need to build up strength and dexterity anyway. So this might be much more manageable for you. Gemstone sockets allow you to take gemstones and put them onto weapons that are going to give them different properties, such as getting more health every time you're able to successfully damage an enemy. So it could be really nice and help with your survivability or help with your ability to do damage towards other enemies. Again, if you're in melee, I think this is well worth it, even though it's forcing you to build up intelligence, which may or may not really be part of your play style. I would still say it's worth taking a detour and picking this up. The only issue that I would bring up with this is, as far as I can tell, it only applies to melee weapons. I found a ton of melee weapons with 3 slots that would allow you to put 3 different gems into them, whereas I found no energy weapons whatsoever that would allow me to use gemstones. Nor did I find any bows that would allow me to do it either. Now, take that with a caveat. This is a huge game with a lot of stuff going on. It's completely possible that those weapons exist, but I never found them. But as someone who, again, finished the majority of the game, did virtually all of the side quests, I never found that weapon, while I found at least 8 or 9 different melee weapons that would allow me to do this. Create ammunition. Ammunition is a big problem in this game because you cannot loot ammunition from enemies, even if they're using your same weapon type. So you can find ammunition out in the world, but usually it'll be, 20 ammunition or somewhere in that range, which is really not a whole lot. So it's very important before you go into missions that you have enough ammunition to survive several long fights, because if you run out of ammo and you only have one type of weapon, that's it. You're just done. That's just all you can do. But looking at create ammunition, the things that are required in order for you to be able to craft ammunition are oftentimes things that you don't get a lot of. So you either have to buy them or make specific farming excursions to get the materials that you need to create this ammunition. And me personally, it just wasn't worth it. If I have to go to the store anyway, then it's not worth buying the materials and then come back and then creating the ammunition. I might as well just straight up buy the ammunition right there and be done with it. Now that is a more expensive way, but you'll see in the, one of the next abilities that we're going to get that I feel like you should be making enough money where that isn't really an issue. And then finally, if you are going to be creating ammunition and you use grenades, obviously it's going to be worth taking this build grenades ability. Next up is animal trophies, which I highly recommend, regardless of your build, you go ahead and get. I finished the game once and then I'm halfway through a second playthrough. And in the first time, I did not get animal trophies. Whereas in the second playthrough, I got animal trophies very early. The difference is night and day. Animal trophies allows you to loot a lot more things from animals when you kill them. You have to kill a ton of bugs and animals in this game, and it's going to allow the money to just rack up for you very, very easily. Definitely recommend everybody pick up all 3 levels of this. So next up is personality, and it starts with attribute points, which is going to allow you to immediately get 10 additional attribute points for you to use. This is very useful late in the game when you're trying to get those high level skills that are going to require 75 points in a particular attribute in order for you to be able to select it. A lot of times you'll want to just go ahead and come here and get that quick boost to try to get that attribute as soon as possible. I do not believe it makes very much sense in the beginning and mid game when I feel like you should be focusing a lot more on combat abilities, abilities that increase your money, or abilities that increase the amount of experience that you get overall. And then there's also attribute, which will give you 1 additional attribute point per level. Again, I don't think that this is worth it. You can't pick up attribute until you pick up 1 level of attribute points. And like I said, I feel like that's more of a late game option. And +1, I mean, when I got through the game, I think I finished around level 39 or 40. So if you pick this around, I guess you could get at level 2 maybe. In fact, not even that, because you would have to raise intelligence to level 50 even in order to be able to get this. So I feel like at the most, you're going to get an additional 25 attribute points, somewhere in that range, which isn't necessarily anything to sneeze at, but I just don't feel like it's worth it. I don't feel like this is worth it at all. And this is only worth it late game, in my personal opinion. Experienced Hunter, Bookworm, and Practitioner all revolve around giving you additional experience points in different ways. I would highly recommend that you go ahead and pick this up, specifically because this game has some content locked behind what level you are at. So there's a possibility that you've done a lot of the quest for a particular faction and you want to do more of it, but it says, well, hey, you've got to be level 20 or you've got to be level 30 before we'll allow you to go further. So by having these things for XP, I feel like it's going to allow you to increase your level faster in the game and help to ensure that you can do whatever you want to do when you want to do it, while also making you significantly more powerful. Haggler allows you to get a discount from traders. I personally, again, don't feel like this is worth it. I feel like you should focus on having more money in your pocket instead of trying to get discounts in certain areas. Feel the same way about cheap learning. So you'll notice over on the right, when you want to increase a particular ability, it's going to have an elixir price associated with it. So for example, to increase cheap learning, it will cost 500 elixir. Some of these abilities that go up to level 5 can cost as much as 5,000 elixir in order for you to be able to increase them. And that's really not anything to sneeze at. But again, I feel like you should focus on having more money, not searching for discounts. I would ignore both of these. Trusted decreases the attribute requirements for dialogues by 10% and then 20%. I do not feel like this is worth it because the vast majority of times when a specific score or attribute score is required in order for you to get a dialogue option, you can actually just back out of the conversation, go do some other things and come back. So if I need to have 50 intelligence in order to convince somebody of something, then I just end the conversation, do some other quests for a couple of hours, increase my intelligence, and then come back when I'm ready to do this quest in the way that I specifically want to do it. So therefore, I would say this really isn't worth it. Advocate allows you to pay less for your crimes, so you can potentially get caught stealing, caught attacking a civilian, things of that nature. honestly, I don't feel like this is worth it. If I get caught in town and all of a sudden the guards are surrounding me, then I just stop the game and reload it and try to steal again without getting caught. I don't feel like trying to lower your crimes really makes sense. And then after personality, you get into the abilities that are specific to different factions, whether they be Berserker, Alb, Morkan, Outlaw, Cleric, whatever it is that you particularly want to join. I joined the Clerics, so I can't really tell you much about the other factions because I haven't ever used the powers. But I will say, from having watched other people use powers, Berserker Flame seems to be very, very effective because not only does it do the initial damage, but there's also a damage over time effect that looks absolutely devastating towards enemies. And then for the Albs, they have Chain Lightning, which I've seen used several times, which again looks absolutely devastating and affects a group of enemies as opposed to just one enemy. So when you get later in the game, you'll end up having to go up against large groups of 7, 8, 9 enemies at one time. And having a way to be able to just damage them all in one shot is very, very useful. Morcon revolves a lot around damaging yourself and then using that to increase your ability to do certain things like more melee damage or run fast and things of that nature. Outlaws focus on using stems to be able to empower themselves more. But just notice that when you use a stem, you get a 50% penalty on experience. So you could decide whether or not that's worth it. Again, I played as a cleric, so I did take a last chance, which instead of dying, the last damage is ignored and you become invincible for a short time. Going through the majority of the game as a glass cannon, this was definitely useful for me. And you'll definitely notice when you know you should have died and realize, hey, I'm still standing on my feet. So well worth picking up. And then the other one is Unwavering, which is going to increase your resistance specifically against reality damage, which a lot of the late game aliens use against you. And again, I definitely noticed having this ability that they would hit me full force with certain powers and it wouldn't do nearly the amount of damage that I expected it to do. Definitely recommend if you're a cleric, you go ahead and pick this up. And then finally, we come to Jetpack. And again, if you've watched my tips video, you know I highly recommend that you go ahead and upgrade the Jetpack. So first is sprint boosters. You can fly faster. Definitely want this. Maneuvering boosters allows you to move sideways in midair with your Jetpack. I got this, but honestly never found a use for it because it basically lets you dodge while you have the Jetpack. But the thing is, when I would dodge, sometimes it was difficult to hold on or reestablish my targeting on a particular enemy. And so it would sometimes be easier to just manually move out the way, especially if you're high up. It's going to take longer for projectiles to reach you. And so it becomes very easy to just move to the side and allow something to pass you by. It's much more difficult if you're facing enemies who are using energy weapons or even shotguns. But with the vast majority of enemies in the game, I feel like they use that basically single target ball that is going to do poison or some sort of other damage towards you. And you could just move to the side and avoid that while still keeping fire against them. And I found that to be more useful, but you can still go ahead and pick this up. Retro rockets allows you to put on retro rockets for your jetpack that will break your fall if you're falling to your death. Definitely recommend you go ahead and pick this up. Once you start flying, sometimes when you're flying at full speed, especially if you've already been doing it for a little bit, it's hard to stop and it's even more difficult to stop safely. So this will help ensure that you don't end up killing yourself while all you're doing is trying to travel through a particular area. And you pick up a lot of retro rockets as you're going throughout the world. And there are some stores that allow you to buy them as well. So it's definitely worthwhile to have this ability open and available for you to attach them to your jetpack. Floating is a monster skill. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to be able to fly up, but you won't be able to shoot or use items while you're flying up. Floating is going to allow you to be able to do that. And there are a lot of enemies that are easier to take out from the air than they are while you're on the ground. And especially as someone who's a ranged combatant and doesn't want to be hit, being able to hover above in the air and then just pick off the targets that you want is very, very useful. You'll automatically get this skill, which is just that you have a jetpack. And then finally, you have additional tank. So you're going to come across and buy fuel tanks throughout the world. And you can add these fuel tanks to your jetpack to allow you to be able to fly for longer periods of time and stay floating for longer periods of time as well. So with this first one, you do have to pay money and you must have an intelligence score of at least 25. But once you've done this first one, all the rest of them are free as long as you actually have fuel to be able to use. So, and note that even though it's in the ability screen, it does not take an abilities point in order for you to add to your fuel capacity. So you should be doing this ASAP. Even at the beginning of the game, every time I come across a store, if it has a fuel tank, I go ahead and pick it up, because upgrading your jetpack makes a huge difference for you in the game, both in combat and when you're just trying to get to a particular landmark. And also recognize when you're increasing this fuel capacity, it means you're going to be able to float for a significantly longer amount of time. So by the time you get this to 50, even when you're coming to those fights where you're dealing with 8 or 9 enemies, you might be able to stay floating for the majority of that time while you're picking them all off. Well worth it. And that is the full abilities list. Hopefully this information was clear to you. It gave you something useful that will help you in your own playthrough. If there are any questions, comments, or concerns about the information I provided, please, by all means, leave a comment. I answer all of my comments, and I will be happy to assist you with any questions that you might have. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like down below, share this content, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will see you all in the next video. Take care.